Brothers and sisters, last week we celebrated the Sunday of the myrrh-bearing women, leaders of the early church who hastened to the tomb because they were fueled by love. Today is the Sunday of the paralytic. We could actually say paralytics, right? Because there was one in the epistle as well, or the Acts of the Apostles, rather. Today we meet a man who hasn't moved much in 38 years. He was, if you will, the opposite of a leader. He is someone who has lost the ability not only to walk, but to walk in the ways of the Lord. Now, every one of us, if we think about it, probably has a sheep pool in our lives, an area where we are paralyzed, so to speak, waiting for someone or something else to move for us, a place where we expect life to happen to us instead of us directing it towards a higher and greater purpose. This could be an area of health, could be finances, could be a relationship, someplace where we're not achieving what we want to achieve. We're immobile. Well, last week we considered Protodeacon Peter's book, The Theology of Leadership, and its 5 pillars of leadership. Today, if you will, I would like us to look at the 5 porticoes. Porticoes, fancy word for a porch. And at the sheep pool in Bethesda, there were these 5 porches, covered gathering places where the people could come into the pool. And presumably this man was laying in the shade of one of these porticoes, a gathering place. What are the 5 porticoes, if you will, of leadership? Deacon Peter draws our attention to God's requirements which are given to us in the law, in Deuteronomy chapter 10. Deuteronomy 10, starting at verse 12, we read Moses telling the people, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I have commanded you this day for your good." So these 5 requirements are our biblical gathering places, our starting points for discipleship and leadership as a result in Christ: to fear, to walk, to love, to serve, and to keep. We'll go through each one as best as we can. When we look at the paralytic who is at this sheep pool, we see a man whose foundations had been buried, if not broken completely, by despair over his situation. And we see now that Christ is going to restore him to lead a new life based now on these principles, biblical principles. So for 38 years, the man's focus was on his problem. Jesus asks him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man replies, "Sir, I have no man to help me." He was looking for a human solution. And as a result of that, he both feared men and resented them. He gave them power over him and his fate. He expected somebody else to be the solution of the problem. And really, what choice did he have in his own mind? But when he encounters Christ, he encounters a new kind of fear, the fear of God, the fear of only listening to the Lord and relying on him as the solution to all his problems. Now, the fear of God is often misunderstood when we talk about that because we are so used to the fear of men, the fear of other people. And the fear of other people is a major driving force in our lives. We talk about the fear of death being kind of the source of our slavery to sin, but even the fear of death draws fuel from the fear of others. Because if we have a loving community around us, a family at our side, people worth dying for, death is not as scary. We can face death. But if we're afraid of people, if we're afraid of being rejected by them, or embarrassed in front of them, or neglected by them, or abused by them, or simply abandoned by them, then facing death is an awful thing. We fear poverty. We fear sickness, because those are unpleasant things. We don't want to experience them. But that experience is made 1,000 times worse if we experience what is called social pain. The pain that comes from other people either mistreating us or neglecting us and ignoring us completely. When we have support from others, even the worst things in life can become bearable. And so Jesus meets this man where he is and connects with him, a human finally to another human, instead of ignoring him. But he doesn't just offer him a human solution. He doesn't offer him a hand and say, sure, when the water comes, I'll put you in there. He could have done that. Rather, he offers him a command instead of a hand. The man encounters the God of his forefathers in the flesh. And as a result of his great wonder, he does an impossible thing. He gets up and he walks. We often say, I have no man as well, in some fashion. We say, if only I had more help, if only I had more volunteers, more money, more health, more opportunity, if only the government worked more efficiently, or what other pipe dream you might have. We want something else to solve our problems, and we don't go first to God. But leadership begins when we stop looking for the man and start looking towards the God-man, looking towards the Lord, who is already standing in front of us, able to make us whole, ready to give us what we really need for our help. So when the Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, it's also the beginning of great and wondrous things for our life. The fear of God is not to be confused with the fear of men. In fact, Deacon Peter makes a really good point in his book. The fear of God sets you free from the fear of other people. If you fear God, who can be against you? Because you know that God is great, and he is mighty, and he is all-powerful. What can man do to him who fears the Lord? Ask the Scriptures. The next focus is walking. Moses says God requires us to walk in all his ways. He said, that sounds impossible, but the Lord shows us exactly what that means, right? To love God, to love your neighbor, to show hospitality to the stranger, to feed the hungry, to do acts of kindness and justice and mercy, and walk humbly with your Lord. So the paralytic's first act of discipleship was to obey a command that was impossible for him, at least in his mind. But he didn't argue. He stood up. He took the very thing that used to carry him, his pallet, his bed, if you can call it that, and he began to carry it instead. To lead, you must first be able to walk. You cannot lead a parish into growth, for example, if we ourselves are spiritually paralyzed by our own habits or our prejudices or past failures or whatever it might be. Good leaders, in fact, leverage their past failures into strength and into wisdom, into insights, learning and growing from them. In fact, brothers and sisters, I would encourage you to think that failure is a better friend to you than success. I've probably said this a few times over the years, but I've learned way more from failure than I ever did from my successes. The danger of success is you think, oh, I've got this. I know how to do this. Everything's peachy. Failure forces you to actually take a really good hard look at what you are and what you've done and what's working and what's not. Failure is your friend. Success is a temptress. The next requirements kind of go together, to love and to serve. After the man is healed, maybe he went home, maybe he didn't even have a home at this point. But what we find out is that Jesus finds him later, we don't know how much later, but probably not long after, in the temple, What do you do at the temple? You praise, you worship, you love the Lord. He went there to give thanks to God out of love. Now, one thing you might not realize is that if this man had been effectively paralyzed for 38 years, he probably hadn't been to the temple in 38 years. And if you roll back the clock on that, that might mean he's never actually been to the temple, because Herod was rebuilding the temple at that time when he first became ill. It may not have been open to the public yet. So this may actually have been his first chance ever going to church, if you will, at the ultimate church, the temple in Jerusalem. And by the way, the temple, even though Herod kind of finished it a few years before the birth of Christ, he was still working on it. And his successors were still working on it until like the AD 60s. So until right before it basically was destroyed by the Romans, it was still kind of in progress. And so he goes to this place to show God love. It's fascinating, though, if you think about it, that of the requirements that God gives to walk, to serve, to keep commandments, included in that is love. It's not that God needs us to love him. He loves us whether we love him or not. But it's a requirement for us to love God in order to be whole, in order to be full. We can love others, but until we actually learn to love God, the ultimate source of our being, the ultimate source of life, the ultimate reason for our existence, our love for others is going to be limited because it's going to be very narrow in scope. But if we have the love of the Lord as the beginning of our love for others, then our love can magnify to the divine level. And so loving is one of those requirements. And so this man goes to love God. But when Christ meets him there in the temple, loving God, he says something very peculiar to him. He says, "See, you've been made well." Some translations say, "Go and sin no more." I don't like that translation great because it suggests that somehow it's saying Jesus was saying, you sinned and that's why you had that problem, and now you've somehow been healed, so if you sin again, you'll suffer something worse. The phrasing in the verb is actually a continual. So continue in sin no more, which suggests that all those years, that man was in a state of sinfulness. Part of it was he was cut off from the communion of the people, not able to go to the temple, not able to participate in the life of faith. That was, in essence, a state of fallenness. But also, again, all that fear and that resentment and that bitterness and that despair and that helplessness. Sometimes the sin that we are trapped in is not some isolated reality. It's a lifelong passion. It's a negative disposition that has taken hold of us in our hearts and won't let go. And Christ is telling him, don't go back to that place. You have been made well. You don't belong there. You don't need to live there. Don't go back. Never again. Be free. This was out of care, out of love for this man's soul, not blaming him for his infirmities. But like success, good health can be a cause for many temptations. When things are going well, we have a tendency to forget God, and that can lead us into all kinds of mischief, can it? So we need to find something wholesome and good to do with our newfound wholeness. The man is made well, and Jesus tells him to go, do not continue in sin, but the implication is go do something good with your life. Go do something righteous and wholesome and worthy. And so what does the man do? He goes and he tells the people, it was Jesus that made me well. He probably got in trouble for that because they were mad at him for walking with his pallet on the Sabbath and all that stuff and wanting to know who healed him on the Sabbath. He probably got in trouble, but he went anyway. He said, Jesus healed me. He bore a witness. He became one who was sent from disciple to apostle. Brothers and sisters, our healing is not for our own comfort. It's so that we can be restored to the point where we can actually be of service to God and our fellow human beings. God cleanses us. He digs us out of that buried foundations so that we can stand strong again, so that we can go out and be a witness to others. This is part of that leadership in which we are all engaged in some respect at some point in our life. Lastly, Moses says that God gave us these commandments for your good, it says. The Hebrew there is latov, which is better than just for your good. It means for the best, most beautiful, most pleasant and joyful outcome possible. Very good, right? The paralytic was stuck in his infirmity for 38 years. Christ's commandment gave him back his life, his legs, his purpose, so now that he could go and live that good and beautiful life that God had prepared for him, not to squander it. Sometimes we think of God's commandments as burdensome. Why does God want me to do this? Why am I supposed to do that? Why do I have to do all these things? Why doesn't God let me do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want? But like the man carrying his bed, these commandments were given to us to keep us healthy, to keep us whole, to keep us on the right path. They keep us mobile instead of paralyzed by our passions. They are guiding us to become our best selves, which is such a great American virtue, isn't it? Be better every day in every way. God already knows how to do that and wants that for you. So consider again that place in your life, brothers and sisters, that is like the sheep pool, a place of frustration, immobility, hopelessness. Christ is standing next to you today. He's asking some of us, do you want to be made well? And maybe to others he's saying, you've been made well. Go and sin no more. Do you want to remain passively paralyzed in your state or become an active disciple of Christ, a leader in training and then in action? To walk in his ways is to rise up, to leave our excuses behind. This week, as you go into your homes, into your jobs, don't wait for the waters to be stirred. Stir them yourselves. Christ has already stirred your heart. Rise, take up your life, and walk in the love of the risen Christ. Christ is risen.